Diablo is an absolute threat to the Disney Lorcana metagame. That's already been proven. It's won 4 Disney Lorcana challenges. It's won multiple other large person tournament events, 500, 600, 700 player events, and things like that. Since the existence of Diablo, it has without a doubt been the most dominant card within Disney Lorcana. In today's video, I am going to be having a friend of mine and teammate, Ryan F. and Miles, take over and take the lead and explain to you in the most educational manner possible of why this is an absolute threat and potentially a card that is absolutely worth banning within Disney Lorcana. So, if you really want to learn something today and really understand the point of view from a player and like minded players to Ryan, then I do believe that this video is going to be absolutely perfect for you to understand fully why Diablo might have to go in order for the game to become a better and more sustainable playing from every single aspect of it. Without further ado, here's Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Ryan F. and Miles here. I feel compelled to make this video, partially because it's impossible to have conversations about it on the internet, partially because it's easier to explain visually for me, and partially because I think Lorcana is like the first TCG for a lot of people, and they don't have the context of card bannings and how to really talk about them. There's like a lot of popular arguments that I see creep up repeatedly, and I don't think that they're really compelling for whether or not a card should be banned. And I hope today I can kind of break those down and explain why I think Diablo is a card that is unbalanced and problematic in current Lorcana. I hope you enjoy. To begin, we have to ignore Diablo for just a moment, and we have to first imagine a truly, like, unequivocally overpowered card. A card that needs no explanation, no nuance, no conversation, just something that is massively overpowered by everyone's rational standards. So I submit to you the bird, a 2 cost 4/4 character with 20 lore. This is broken, right? Let's put on our design hats. Let's try and bring it in line. What does a balanced version of a card this powerful look like? Well, our first problem, the one of many, right, is that its stats are way too big. You can't reasonably kill this card before it quests, gains 20 lore, and wins the game. Well, let's tone those down, bring them in line with some removal options, right? And voila, you've got a character that dies to most removal on turn 2, and now this is fine, right? This solves the problem. No, of course not. You see where I'm going, but what's wrong with this, right? If you kill the card, nothing bad happens. This is a repeated argument I see regarding Diablo, that you can just kill it. This argument holds no water because it does not take into account the risk reward of playing the card. If the bird here goes unchecked, I literally win the game. You are forced to have an answer immediately, or nothing else you do matters. Many intricacies of the game, the decision points, the mulligan decisions, board presence, late game, deck building, even all interesting aspects of the game devolve into drawing as many copies of this card as you can, making it resilient to your opponent's removal, and also being able to remove your opponent's copies of the bird, right? If you've played Lorcana competitively in the past 6 months, does this sound familiar? Now, as I said, Diablo is obviously much less powerful than the bird, right? Diablo does not literally say win the game. Diablo just says draw a card. But how close can we say draw a card is to win the game? If we go back to the bird, we adjusted the stats, but we have other design levers that we can tweak, right? Let's agree that 20 lore is just way too much. When we're looking at how much lore a card generates, it's very easy to know how close it is to win the game, right? One lore is 1/20th of winning. Let's take that down a notch and reevaluate. We cut this card's power in half. It dies to removal. It doesn't say win the game. Is it still too strong? I hope we can agree that yes, absolutely. Ignoring for now that if you have 2 copies of this card, it does just win the game. We can safely say that this is just too much lore. You're progressing too far towards the win condition for too little. Even 5 lore is still too much for this card, no matter how many answers or removal pieces exist, right? We have framework in Lorcana that tells us how much lore is acceptable for a 2 cost card. We have other examples. We have balance indicators. A card's power level cannot be written off solely by answers exist or the classic dies to removal argument. You have to compare it to other things in the game. And while 5 lore for 2 ink is like very obviously still too much, we do know that cards exist in Lorcana that generate that much lore. While the bird that we just looked at is obviously overpowered, Bell, Goofy, Mirabelle all see little to no play, right? Like this seems obvious. How good a card is very closely tied to how much it costs. our original bird might actually be fine for like a 10 ink card, ignoring the queen. But these cards raise no ban list alarm bells for like a few reasons. Threats that come down later in the game allow more time for answers to be drawn, and there's also more risk to playing these cards. Belle has relatively weak stats for a 4 cost if she would die to a Brawl or a Madame Mim Fox. If she gets brawled, the Belle player trades 1 for 1 on cards, but they lost an ink on tempo. If she is able to quest, and then dies to a Madame Mim Fox, you get your lore out of the deal, but then you lose a card and you lose the 4 ink that you invested into getting her on the board. Taking your entire turn to develop a Goofy doesn't do much if your opponent can use their entire turn to quest out and play even more threats. While you have these powerful cards that quest for 4 and 5, there's no question about whether or not they're too powerful, like the bird. They just have clear and obvious trade offs. So finally, it's time to talk about Diablo. First, let's just touch briefly on power level. A Diablo unchecked will win more games than not. Card advantage just does win games. Its power level really is most comparable to a Sad Beast or the Queen. These are 5 mana cards where they draw 1 extra card a turn. Diablo draws at least 1 extra card a turn, more if your opponent feeds it, and can quest and sing without being as vulnerable as these cards because it's evasive. Whether or not you subjectively think Diablo is overpowered or not, when you look at the balance indicators in Lorcana for this type of effect, it is clear that 5 ink is roughly, if not the minimum, of what we should expect to pay. Instead, we are getting this effect for 1. Moving forward, we're going to talk specifically about the Diablo shift line, where a Diablo can be assumed to cost 1 ink and 2 cards rather than just playing him for 3 ink. When Diablo comes down on turn 2, it doesn't say kill me or I'm getting 20 lore. It says I quest, I gain a lore, I draw a card. If you fire the cannons, a Diablo immediately, the fire the cannons player actually comes out ahead. You spend 1 ink for 1 ink. The Diablo player lost their baby Diablo, they lost an action, they lost the big Diablo, and you only expended your 1 fire the cannons. While they drew a card, to recoup, the fire the cannons player comes out 1 card ahead and even on tempo. And if you're watching this and you're still subscribing to the answers exist, so it's fine argument, it's time to cash out because it only goes downhill from here. Fire the cannons is the only card that exists that will actually punish a Diablo. The only card in Disney Lorcana that you can reliably point at a Diablo and come out ahead. And I do say reliably because, Triton's Decree exists, but any other removal spell, right? But boom, smash, brawl. If you spend more than 1 ink killing a shifted Diablo, you fall behind in tempo. And only if you kill the Diablo the turn it comes out do you come out ahead by 1 card. Any later, and you only break even in cards while you fall behind in tempo. And this is so problematic. This is so often overlooked by newer players because it means that you're unable to answer other threats at the same pace. If your first answer to Diablo is smash or brawl, the Diablo player has time to develop other threats. Using your turn 3 to banish their turn 1 play means that you aren't using that turn yourself to match or banish their turn 3 play. Now, of course, in Lorcana, you can sing songs for less than 1 ink, but the only song that your turn 2 character can sing to kill a Diablo is Teeth and Ambitions. You only get to sing that if the Diablo player is going second. And that's before we even get into the existence of Ursula Deceiver, or before we get into how Diablo himself sings the very songs that would kill other Diablos. There is just a fundamental lack of efficient answers to Diablo in Lorcana. Now, an argument I see often is that, well, let's not ban Diablo, right? Let's just wait for more answers to come out. If the problem is that we don't have efficient answers, why don't we just make them? Well, the problem here is twofold because, first, better answers push more things out of the format than just the problem card. Medusa and Along Came Zeus probably stopped Sad Beast from being a Diablo in its own right, but these cards also limit a lot of other very interesting cards from seeing any play. And if you've ever played against Medusa, I think you know what I'm talking about. Printing more powerful answers to powerful cards can help with the problem, but you usually make the game worse for it, and you make other cards weaker and more cards weaker by doing so. Secondly, the play pattern of answering every threat your opponent plays is like cool for control players, but it's not baseline interesting or something that you want exclusively in a game or something that's really present anywhere else in Lorcana. And what I mean by that is anytime your opponent plays a card that costs X amount of ink, you get to make a decision. Do you develop your own threat for the same amount of ink, or do you take that time to remove their threat instead? There's this evaluation of your board versus their board and your cards versus their cards. Even blue decks do a lot of developing early before throwing the removal spells later on. There's interesting decisions about choosing what to develop, when to remove, but Diablo warps all of this because his card text is so fundamentally powerful. There is nothing that you can do for one ink that threatens as much advantage as Diablo. There's nothing for three ink that threatens as much card advantage as Diablo. Every deck that wants to be competitive has to over index into Diablo removal because its threat level is legitimately unparalleled. The aggro deck that Luxury Gaming took to a top 8 finish in Seattle and a golden Mickey is an excellent example of how meta warping Diablo is, because this is an aggro deck with 4 copies of Amethyst Chromacon, a deck that is all about using ink to gain lore. This deck almost does not care how many cards the opponent draws because it uses its own cards to gain lore in a much more efficient way. This deck still paid massive respect to Diablo with 4 Brawl and 2 Peter Pan Shadowfinder. While Brawl is like definitely a fine catch all, and I could probably make this whole video talking about Hiram if we're being honest, the presence of Peter Pan Shadowfinder in this deck is a testament to how important killing Diablo is. An aggro deck has to dedicate these precious uninkable slots on a card, that only quests for one, all to kill Diablo. There is legitimately like no other reason that Peter Pan Shadowfinder is in this deck. Finally, it's time to talk about Diablo's supporting cast: the Hidden Cove, the Steel Songs, the Ursula Deceiver, and Pete. Hidden Cove is not in itself a problematic card. It sees no play at all in the green decks that isn't aren't that it sees no play at all in the green decks that aren't playing Diablo. And I think the presence of Cove in Diablo decks is like the biggest indicator to why Diablo is such a problem. Like, you don't see Clarabelle decks playing Cove to protect their draw engine. You don't see green purple protecting their rabbits from Brawl with Cove, right? The +1/+1 is like fine normally, but being able to use your early turns to set up and protect Diablo specifically, it pinches the efficient removal options for Diablo even further, right? When you consider a potentially overpowered card. Not something as bad as the bird from the beginning of the video, but something that does feel close to crossing the line. The first thing that everyone tries to do, is solve the problem, find the removal, play the clean answers. They play the tech cards that beat it. You see more Brawl, you see Peter Pan Shadowfinder, you see Baboom. When Diablo decks start adding multiple Cove to their deck, a lot of these answers don't function. When decks try to play evasives that can challenge Diablo, like Pegasus or the Magic Broom Aerial Cleaner, Storm Rage On and Strength of Raging Fire help Diablo protect itself. Ursula Deceiver stops other songs from being answers and instead turns them into a liability. Pete buys one extra turn against, a smash or a brawl, and that one extra turn means one extra card. You reach this point in deck building where you need Fire the Cannons and Baboom to try to not fall behind on tempo, but then you also need Smash in case they have the Cove. And through all these decisions you have to make in deck building, you're just removing cards that progress your own game plan. Remember, earlier we talked about play patterns. You play a threat, I play a threat. If I have to overload my removal just to beat Diablo, I'm no longer building a deck in a way that is interesting or letting me self express or even like considering the metagame as a whole. In fact, trying harder to beat Diablo generally makes you worse against a deck like Red Blue. And I could do a whole nother video talking about how Diablo's existence probably makes Red Blue better. But anyway, so for some ink combinations, the problem is that there is just no way at all, right, to answer a Diablo. But for others, the problem is not that we can't answer Diablo. The problem is that we have to. And when faced against the protection that green steel or even green yellow can provide, some games end before they even begin. In summary, if there's anything I want you to take away from this video, if you have conversations with people about this topic, if there's one soundbite I want you to be able to repeat, it is this: Diablo is too powerful relative to the rest of the cards in Lorcana. Other signposts tell us this effect should cost 5 ink. Being evasive makes them resilient to normal character based combat. Diablo being green gives them easy access to protection in Ursula Deceiver and Hidden Cove that further negates targeted removal being effective. The baby Diablo gives too much information when shifting a Diablo should be a lot riskier than it is. Diablo costing 3 lets him sing removal songs too early that further allow him to protect himself against evasives and interact too well with decks that are trying to be aggressive and go under Diablo. Now, Diablo is not unbeatable. Green Steel does not beat every deck in the game. Playing a Diablo is not a guaranteed win. But every TCG that has ever existed in ban cards did not do so because those cards were completely unbeatable. There's been this conversation about, oh, if you remove Cove, it's less of a problem. If you remove Baby Diablo, if you ban Storm Rage on Prince John, etc., doing any of these things would be undoubtedly helpful and make the game better. But the short of it is, when you have a card like Diablo in the game, you're massively limiting future design space. Cove should be a fine card to exist. It's cool design. It helps shore up Green's weaknesses in combat. Diablo is what makes it problematic. Storm is only a problem when you sing it with a card that costs one. Cinderella. And Baby Diablo is a pretty bad card. You don't play it without Big Diablo. And if you ban the baby, the existence of these purple Baby Diablos means that the green purple color combination becomes this ticking time bomb where it's just waiting for the right density of powerful actions where that it doesn't currently have. Now, you wouldn't print any version of the bird from the beginning of this video into Lorcana, right? And if you're working at Ravensburger, your finger slips on the printer, then it accidentally gets made, you wouldn't expect your community to vehemently defend why that card should exist, right? Mistakes are mistakes. Designers are human beings. After Bucky was nerfed, it took top players a while to fully flesh out the green steel list that we see today. Game design's this complex beast, and knowing that it took thousands of players months to create this problematic version of green steel that we have, it is like extremely unreasonable to expect a small design team to have reached the same conclusions and then perfectly balanced every single card while also trying to create compelling gameplay, right? You want to print good cards that see play. But now we have the data. We have the curated lists, and it's become overwhelmingly clear to top players that Diablo is a problem. We have to admit that our finger slipped on the printer. Diablo should not have been made, and we need to fix that mistake. Thank you.